Namaste and welcome everyone to our continuing series Evenings with Sraddhalu. And I welcome Narad who is with us. Namaste.
Namaste, Elena.
We are all happy to have you with us. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste and namaste to Narad and to
Namaste.
all of you who are present.
We are happy to continue today, part 9 on the same current affairs. And today we will be exploring the false narratives promoted by the media. And as usually, we may take your questions in the future if you send them by your email at our email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com. And you may also post your questions on our YouTube channel during our conversation, and we will be taking up that later. And I will start with a comment that we had from Kalpesh last time. Do you mean 250 bases, not 250 countries? The United States has about 750 military bases in more than 80.
Yes. Last time, while speaking, inadvertently I said 250 countries in which the US has military activities. It's more accurate. The number was 250 was relating to something which had to do with number of conflicts. But US officially has more than 1,000 military bases in more than 80 countries. The exact number is classified, but this is pretty much what is accepted generally. So this is a correction, and I've also posted a line in the description of previous session. There was one more comment. We can go to the next. The comment from Maya and Running Lawyer, both who had put a text in the chat box that Abraham Accord countries.
Sorry,
Yes.
I can address them. The Abraham Accord countries: Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco.
It's very important to see what is specific about these countries and the extent to which they are already reasonably free from what we would call the extremist Islam. And so what is important in continuation of the discussion last time is the removal of that, let's say, control centers which kept a division, allowed the countries now to suddenly come together. I do believe something similar may happen at some point even in relation to Pakistan and India, because Pakistan is a very good example of a deep state controlled country and cabal controlled country. As you know, it had the CIA's largest station outside the United States for a couple of decades, and once they are in, they don't get out easily. And the entire controlling group, which is based in the military and particularly inside the intelligence agency, the ISI, is quite rapidly, cabal controlled, I will say. The whole appearance of an Islamic hatred, division, etc. is further play on a superficial level. Certainly there may be elements in the intelligence agencies as well as the military which are highly Islamized in an extremist Islam, but for many of them it's really not a question of that. It is a question of interests, power structures, and sometimes just alignments with certain Asuric energies. And so if at some point there is a sudden shift in that elite structure, what we see on the grassroots, on the ground level, is very different. I remember when it was sometime, I think it was under Vajpayee government, that there was an agreement made to allow Indians to travel across the border for some cricket match. The number of Indians who just went across, they came back with stories of such warmth and welcoming from the Pakistani people on the ground level. They would travel sometimes by car, and there would be these dhabas for food where people would say, "Oh, you're from India, we will not charge you because you're our brothers." And it was dangerous for the Pakistani elite to have that kind of camaraderie and brotherhood, and so they quickly shut down and created problems, created attacks on a military level to create anger and hatred between the people, or fear. So it's a point I have made before, that Pakistan as an entity does not have a nation soul. After all, culturally, spiritually, it is a part of India, and artificially separated based on some British drawing a line across the border and saying, this is a different country on the basis of a religion which never defines a country. And the result is, not having a soul, it can only survive by a false and artificial ego sense. The ego sense, therefore, has to be built on what? Fear or hatred of another, because it has no identity of its own. And therefore, Pakistani elite military or cabal controls thrive on creating fear or hatred towards India. Hatred, they use elements of extremist Islam. For fear, they will say threats of nuclear or other military strength, etc. But in the long run, the fear element cannot survive because there's a track record that India has going back decades. And it has never used its weapons or military ever to invade anybody. And even where it has had to intervene, as in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka on 2 occasions, the army pulled out when it was asked to leave, and that was it. This has never happened in the history of any other country. So there is really no reason to fear. But the hatred then has to be fomented on a kind of an extremist ideology. And it is for this reason that they have to keep pumping the ideological content. What is interesting though is even within Pakistan, it does not stick. Because after all, the people are not very different in the consciousness and, let's say, mind form. They're very much Indian. And so there's a point after which it does not work. And it was interesting to know a few years ago, there was actually a debate on television where they were saying that India has grown so much economically and otherwise that Pakistan is so far behind, it might be better for Pakistan to reunite with India. And this was the debate. The debate was not this. Everyone agreed, yes, it would make sense. The debate was whether India would accept Pakistan to reunite or not. It was interesting. So even as a suggestion, it is interesting to see the direction in which the thinking of the common man works. And if you just remove this false artificial ego crust perversion, things can just very smoothly and rapidly move forward. And this is what we see happening with the Abraham Accords. We can go to the next question.
Boromir is asking, who are the people running the cabal?
And I would highly recommend for those of you who have started seeing this somewhere in between, please do go back to these this is the 9th, so going from the 1st to the 9th on the current affairs, because we have discussed these questions somewhat in depth, in detail, in a layered way. If you skip those and you come in between, suddenly you'll find elements that you don't quite follow. And one of the points I had made was that this, what we have called the cabal, actually represents worldwide certain interests, certain mindsets, and certain alignments to Asuric energies. They are not necessarily organized on a global scale. They are not necessarily all united in their purpose either. They are often disparate groups, but united in their alignment and allegiance to those energies. And therefore, often there is a kind of a coordinated action which may or may not always be physically, humanly coordinated. But the common elements of those is this, because it is an Asuric energy, is the destruction of humanity and the setting back of evolution by a domination and a one world organization of government in which an elite will rule the mass, which should be slaves. Such is the broad framework. And then within that there are groups, subgroups, and so on. From what we understand from some of the descriptions, particularly some of the links I had shared before, that at the highest levels the elite are about a few thousand only. And among them they control pretty much everything that happens in the world. This is not so far out to understand. If you look at the United States, for example, the entire media, which may have about 300 different network stations and several hundred journals and so on, the entire media is owned directly or indirectly, eventually by 6 corporations, and now it's 5 corporations. All these corporations are manufacturing weapons of war and profit from war. So necessarily their interest on the media will be tilted towards promoting war and so on. So if you look at those 5 corporations now, who control the policies, it comes down to a handful of people finally. So it's not such a big deal when you think about it to have this kind of coordinated action. But among the corporations, there might be some kind of rivalry. But they're united on the common fact that they would like more wars, because they may have a rivalry on who gets the bigger deal, the chunk of money or the power which comes with the wars. But they are agreed on the fact that they want more wars, and so on. This is just to give an example. So for me, it's not so important who are the people. It's not so important to what extent they are coordinated as a structure. You have to see it as a framework of values and with an occult power which is formed to block human evolution. The details are not important. And so for our purpose, if we understand what they intend, how they work, we should be able to see through their agenda and work to bypass it, to push forward the evolutionary purpose. That's the point of this series and this discussion on current affairs. What can we do, understanding the deeper nuances of what's happening, to move forward? We can go to the next question.
The puppy, we have one question. If we are going to judge someone by their actions, how do you explain Trump being good for everyone in policies and praising the COVID jab? It's literally a nightmare what this jab is doing to people's health.
Yes. Yes, this was one of the reasons why many people were even upset with Trump's, let's say, promise to do good for humanity, because he seemed to be promoting the vaccination, and for many that was a point of as if a betrayal, because as we know and we have discussed here also, it has been extremely harmful for many and worldwide. For this, you have to understand the bigger picture. If you go back a few years, you will find across the various sources, and there is one which is quite amazing, it was in the late 90s, who actually gave a date, and the date was 2017, when there would be, the cabal had already planned for a worldwide virus release based on which there would be a global lockdown for several years, and they would effectively shut the economy, and that's when the one world government would be instituted. Now, the dating is quite close, and as we've seen before already, the emergence of Trump delayed many of the cabal plans. We do see Bill Gates in 2016 and 15 already prophesying a global virus pandemic and demanding preparations for it. When Trump pulled out the funding from the WHO because it was being led by China policies, it was Bill Gates who filled the gap and led the WHO process during the pandemic for imposing lockdowns, masking, and so on. But what is important to understand, what Trump did actually broke the cabal plan. The plan was, if you follow a normal process of vaccination or development of a vaccine, it takes about 5 years. And if at that point they said, all right, now we have to create a vaccine. Remember, they had already got the world in lockdown for about a month and a half at least. And then they say, now we need a vaccine. And unless everybody is vaccinated, there is no way we can lift the lockdown, just because of the so-called death rates. And then you're kept in lockdown for 5 years. What do you think would happen? And by then, all kinds of other things would have been instituted. The one world government would be in place. What Trump did, and for this he received enormous opposition from within his own government, in the bureaucracy, from the pharma industry, and all other cabal-controlled media. What he did was, he went for innovative solutions. From the very beginning, he spoke out openly about the use of hydroxychloroquine as a preventative for the COVID infections, as well as a treatment. And he spoke of various other treatments which were all part of current medicine, already proved, validated in various hospitals, in laboratories. There were people, for example, Dr. Shankara Chetty from South Africa had treated about 5,000 patients with zero hospitalization, zero oxygen, zero deaths. using a combination of hydroxychloroquine and other medicines, which were all off the counter. If this had been popularized, as Trump had attempted, then there would have been no pandemic. It would have been freed very quickly. The media went violently against. In France, where hydroxychloroquine was actually available over the counter for decades, going back 50, 60 years, the government officially banned the sale of hydroxychloroquine to prevent common man even from attempting to use it. And that's how they ensured the pandemic continued. And in the United States, similarly, hydroxychloroquine was banned with a lot of media fanfare criticizing Trump for having suggested it even. And what they did was they gave falsely, again, these were false statements in the media with headlines claiming that Trump said you should inject your blood with some cleaning agent and things like that, which was completely false. If you see the actual statements of Trump, they were very different. What the media stated was totally different. So when you have this idea that Trump actually promoted the vaccines, you have to see the full picture. Next, what he did, because this was blocked by the media control, and he was unable to prevent this because the entire machinery was opposed to him, he started what he called Operation Warp Speed, in which vaccines would be released as an experimental vaccine within a very short time to remove the lockdowns. This was the strategy, for which the government funds were given. And Pfizer was the only company which did not take the funds for development of the vaccine. The reason being, they would not be accountable to the government for what they injected in the vaccines. Whereas others who took the funds would automatically come under government scrutiny and could not hide the quality controls and the content of the vaccination. With all that having said, when it came to the rollout of the vaccine, Trump was very clear: no mandates, no compulsions, vaccines were completely optional. So effectively what he did was he broke the strategy of the cabal to keep the world in a lockdown for 5 years by giving a solution which they could not deny anymore, and at the same time ensuring that, knowing the vaccines might be harmful, nobody is compelled to use them. Now, the only places we saw the vaccine being imposed as a mandate and people threatened from even going to work or keeping their shops open were in the Democrat states in the United States. In India, it was the Congress party ruled states which rejected the Indian developed vaccine, which actually had no side effects, which was a real vaccine, and promoted instead the AstraZeneca based vaccine, which was UK based, which was known to have untested side effects and so on. So you saw again the cabal controlled entities, wherever they could, stood up for pushing vaccination by a mandate. Trump repeatedly said no mandates, and he ensured that within the states, at least that he controlled, there were no mandates. So you had Florida, where people went about completely normal. Yes, a few people had infections and so on. Deaths were practically nil. Those who died were already had secondary and tertiary problems of various kinds. And so it's difficult to say whether it was caused by COVID or it happened by the, let's say, high fever, which would have otherwise even eliminated those people. And then you had, in contrast, the complete lockdown in certain states and the fear. And in the New York State, for example, the then head of the New York State actually sent infected people into the nursing homes in the lockdown, which triggered many deaths in the nursing homes and thereby pushed up the number of deaths. So it was quite fascinating to see the struggle that took place at that point between cabal-controlled interests which wanted lockdown and the non-cabal controlled interests which were fighting to prevent the lockdown. And it was fascinating to see how the media was justifying it. So on the same day, you had the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in New York State, about 5,000 people assembled with no masking, no separation, no 6 feet distancing, nothing. They're all bumping into each other, shouting, demonstrating. And at the same time, you are prevented from opening a shop where maybe 1 or 2 people might come at a time. You are allowed to have bars to which you could go, but you could not go to churches. And things like that. This kind of duplicity and double standards, which were justified in the media, And even I think Fauci was, as head of the NIH, made a statement that Black Lives Matter is an exception, and for those people, since they're demonstrating for their rights, you have to allow without imposing a mandate or masking. So it was not scientific statements, these were political statements, and you saw a lot of this kind of duplicity if you followed the alternate media. If you went with mainstream media, you would have the illusion that everybody was shut down and the whole world was shut down equally, which was not the case. So I'm just placing this as an example of how we have been misled even about what Trump did with the vaccination itself. And to this day, he keeps speaking of how it saved millions of lives. And the point you have to understand why. It saved millions of lives by breaking the lockdowns. Had the lockdowns continued, things would have been far worse. And so that was the strategy through which he kind of cut through certain cabal plans. But again, these are things you will not find explained too much in the mainstream media, so the misunderstandings continue. We can go to the next question.
We have a longer letter, but I will read the first part comment of Constantine. To really get a feel for the depths of Trump's corruption, read Bob Woodward's trilogy, Rage, Peril, and Fear. This is a man without a drop of human kindness, tenderness, or empathy. It is ironic that he would pretend to combat human trafficking, all while taking thousands of children and babies and cruelly separating them from their parents at the border. Trump is no peacemaker. He's a malevolent villain, a serial assaulter, and someone who lies as easily as he breathes. He's still a poisonous and malicious demagogue, as well as a ruthless sociopath for whom people mean nothing. If you read these books, it is impossible to come to any other conclusion.
Okay. I've edited out portions of the question. It's longish. He repeats the same idea. He or she repeats the same idea many times. But basically, it's all about read these 3 books, and the only conclusion you will have is that Trump is, and you have a list of abusive terms. And I'm sure if you read those books, you might come with those conclusions. The question is that true? And as you have seen the way the media, and we have been documenting some of this, and I don't want to go too much into it because it's not my point to prove that Trump is a good man or a bad man. I'm trying to give a larger picture in which we can understand many more things. But as you can see, there's a string of expletives and criticisms backed by what? An impression. Created by what? Reading 3 books. If you look at the actions of the man, if you actually listen to his talks, if you look at his interviews, not somebody else's interpretation of him as presented through a media promoted book, you get a totally different impression. And I have deliberately, in the information on this today's session, I put another 3 more links of interviews with Trump. Last time also I had put a couple of links of interviews. Please do look at those. I would even say watch some of Trump's rallies. All of those are available online. Go back to rallies and discussions he had before. And you must understand, in a political rally, there is a posturing, and that you have to kind of cut through. But look at the points he makes, look at the things he states. Look at the videos of him when he was president, when he was speaking to the media, when he was in public functions, when he was giving public discourses on various themes, when he was speaking with the police or various other groups. You find a completely different image, not at all matching this particular description. You find a man who's extremely compassionate, who's extremely helpful. Look at interviews of people who have worked with him for most of his life, his former secretaries and employees who worked directly with him, not 2 or 3 levels down. And they all come with this common thing: a person who's extremely compassionate, who looks at each person on a human level. Now, the picture is totally different. Yes, I'm sure if you read those books, you will come to this conclusion. The question is, do you really trust those books? Knowing the bigger agenda of the cabal and the attempt and the extent to which they have deceived, lied to you about Trump's own actions, not told you about all the good things. And that's the reason why I've gone into so many details last time, also to give you the big picture. Again, it's not about Trump. I'm not concerned about Trump. I'm looking at the actions of a few individuals who are disrupting the cabal-controlled attempt to reduce the world to a one-world government. and who are able to break through this. And as a result, it gives us hope. For me, this direction of hope is important, because for a very long time we did not see hope. We only saw the darkening. And even now, with the hope breaking, the next 2 years are going to be critical. Even I would say the next 1 year will be the most critical. And with all that, if we can cling to this hope and build upon it and even work on it individually in our own spaces, then a lot could happen. So my goal is different. I'm not here to prove to you that Trump is a good man or not. But if you really want to know him, don't go by these books which you are obviously biased. Go directly to the man, look at those videos. And you'll notice one thing very interesting. All the videos, all the interviews, all interactions with Trump that you will find, and they're all available everywhere online. Till 2015, every interviewer praises him sky high. Every interviewer respects him and is affectionate and caring. All the news articles about him are full of positive descriptions. From 2015, when he stands for elections, the media starts spinning into a negative turn. So if you just separate these and you see this before and after presentation of the media, it's obvious the media is playing a game to fool you. And then if you start believing what's in those books, well, you can believe anything. Because with a few artful play of words and even obvious overt lying, as I've given examples of how the media has lied quite blatantly, cooking up videos even, once you know that, then you don't trust anything that comes indirectly. It was for me the same experience. Initially, I just said, well, anybody who gets through to president level is controlled. And even if it's controlled opposition, doesn't interest me. But when I saw the media attacking him, that made me question, what is he doing right? And that's when I began to go deeper and discovered so much more. So we can go to the next question.
Konstantin, he has another second comment on Trump. Trump is a serial sexual assaulter. If you Google Trump sexual assaults, you can find all 25 cases, many of them highly credible. Jean Carroll is perhaps the most credible. A jury found 12 out of 0 that Trump was guilty of security abusing her in a department store. Earlier, he lied and he said he never seen her before, till the prosecution introduced a photo of them together.
Yes.
Shall
So-
I read?
No, that's it. I think
Okay.
it's fine. I've edited the question because there's the same thing much longer. But this accusation that Trump is a serial sexual assaulter, again, it's a media entire cook-up. If you look at what happened, they put up a string of names of people who came forward claiming that they had been sexually assaulted. And what is fascinating is none of those stuck. None of them could provide any evidence, and it was entirely intended to create an impression. And I find it interesting that Konstantin finds Jean Carroll's claim to be the most credible, because all she says was, sometime about 25 years ago, she has no memory of the date also, she's in a department store, Trump walks in, grabs her, pulls her into a changing room and rapes her and walks away. Now, it is such a ridiculous statement even. First of all, Trump would rarely go to a department store. For what? And if he has gone to buy something and not to rape somebody. And if he finds somebody interesting, if you look at his interactions as a gentleman, you don't just drag somebody. And if he did in a department store, all she had to do was shout, even once while being dragged. And there were dozens of people there. If you're in a changing room, you just have to shout one moment. There are people just outside. Nobody sees you go into a changing room and wait for you to go in for no reason at all. It's the most ridiculous statement ever. She has no memory of the date. At that time, she does nothing. For 25 years, she does nothing. And then one day, suddenly she says, now it's bothering me, so I make this accusation. Yes, the jury perhaps found him guilty of, not of rape, by the way, but of some kind of abuse on some technical point, because the jury was entirely Trump-hating people. It took place in the New York city courts. So again, it's a jury. Legally, it has zero value. At the end of the day, nothing stuck. All accusations against him have failed. There was one accusation, again, which the media made a big deal about, Stormy Daniels. She was a prostitute who claimed that Trump had used her and so on. What is fascinating is that survived. The media played that for a while. And then one day a picture came out of Stormy Daniels, the prostitute, with a mark on her stomach of a branding, but they make a metal which is hot and press it on the flesh to make a mark. That's a branding mark of being a member of the Nexium group cult. And all of those high-level members who were DOS, they were called, they were sex slaves basically in the Nexium cult, and they were part of this mind control. I've mentioned this somewhere in one of the sessions before. They all took this branding mark, and the picture came out with her branding on the abdomen. From that point, it was known that she was part of that cult, and she was therefore part of the, cabal control entities. She went silent, the media went silent, stopped talking about her. So what is interesting is the media keeps playing these stories about sexual assault and creates an impression. We go back with an impression, nobody bothers to actually follow up. What happened to that story? It faded out. Why? We don't know, media was busy with other things. But did you see that it was actually thrown out because of zero evidence? And if you have a series of such claims with zero evidence, then you know that there's no point to it. Had Trump been a serial sexual assaulter, there would have been a track record of such claims going back several years. If they appear suddenly after he becomes president or stands to become president, then you know that it's a made-up thing. I'm just using common sense to say this. And knowing the media, knowing how vicious the cabal and the media is against him, you would expect not just this, but much worse. Why am I spending so much time to take up these issues is because these comments have been unfortunately put up, not sent to us as questions, but have been put up as comments against the video. So those of you who might read those comments might come in doubt. I took it up as something to be clarified. The same thing happened, if you remember, with the Justice Kavanaugh, who was one of two justices to the Supreme Court that Trump selected. He had a track record, spick and span and clean, going back through his entire life as a judge and as a human being, as a family man, in every way. When he is being taken through the grilling that goes through in Congress before he's accepted as a judge, they could find nothing against him. The best they did finally was to have a similar accusation of a woman who was professor, I believe it was in from Stanford University, one of the schools. She's a professor there, and she comes up with a claim that when she was underage, 16 or 17 years old, one day Kavanaugh, who was also underage, drags her, rapes her, and walks out. And she has no other memory of specifics of details of the date or anything. She cannot remember how she got to that place of the party. She cannot remember how she came back from the party to her home because she was underage, she could not drive. And she claims she came out alone, didn't speak of it to anyone for all these years, and now suddenly she remembers it. And since she could not drive, how did she go to the party or come back? Again, unknown, no memory. But the media played it up, made a big sentimental play about it. What is fascinating is when these claims came up, if you Googled her name, you could find nothing against her. Nothing on her name. That is, who is she? What does she do? If she's a professor, what's her track record? What does she teach? What are the papers she has published? Zero. It was as if the internet had been scrubbed clean, which can only be done by a very powerful agency, as you can understand. And then they discovered one paper, which was in her name, by the way. And it was scrubbed out from the internet, but it was available in printed form. That they could not scrub. What was she? She was officially the CIA recruiter in Stanford University. So first you see she is part of the deep state cabal control system. She is an official recruiter for students. I don't know if you're aware, in the United States, in all the elite universities, there's an official CIA recruitment program which is instituted where they invite students to enroll. Okay, so she is the official recruiter there, and as a psychologist, she's a professor of psychology. As a psychologist, one of the papers she has published is how to implant false memories through hypnosis. Her specialization is implanting false memories under hypnosis. Now, this is the woman that comes up with claims of, memories of having been raped by Justice Kavanaugh when so many decades ago. What I'm giving you as information is available. Had mainstream media been genuine, they would have flashed this up. they would have put this as headlines. It's all suppressed. Instead, they played a woman who's weeping, who's crying over having been raped. And again, with zero evidence, finally the whole thing fell through. But it left that impression of Justice Kavanaugh as a sexual offender. Again, my point is, if there is a truth to, because Constantine has said Trump is a serial sexual assaulter, there has to be a serial pattern going back. It cannot just appear once when he is suddenly becoming president. So, just to give you a background, this is how you must look through the presentations. Do not trust the media. As I keep saying, the media is not your friend. They are here to promote a different agenda. We can go to the next question.
Third comment, that it doesn't matter that he sexually abuses women or steals babies from thousands of parents at the border, because he did something positive like the Abraham Accords with MBS of Saudi Arabia, in parentheses, who incidentally probably doesn't appear so wonderful to the Khashoggi family. That is the family of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who MBS chopped up into little pieces for writing things that MBS didn't approve of.
Yes, it's a perfect replication of what the media has been telling you. But is it true? So, there's another point which I missed commenting on when you speak of this Trump taking thousands of children and babies and cruelly separating them from their parents at the border. This was the media projection again. Fact, those pictures which were presented with babies actually in cages, not babies, some babies also, but children separated from the adults with cages, all those pictures were from Obama era policies before Trump became president. Isn't this fascinating? The media took Obama era photographs, presented them as Trump era photographs, and blamed Trump for something which Obama had already instituted as a policy, or was instituted under Obama, and I doubt even if Obama knew about it. Why were these policies instituted? Because there was massive human trafficking taking place in the US southern border, where children would be brought by adults who were not related to them, who were not their parents. They would declare themselves some distant relative or uncle, and they were basically trafficking and selling children. Sometimes parents would give the children, thinking that they will get a better life, not knowing that they were being trafficked for many other reasons, which we have discussed, I will not repeat. So when it was detected that they were not related, they were separated, to give a chance for the child to be able to speak up and say, no, actually the person is trafficking me and I'm being abused. Otherwise there's no other chance. If they're together, they're afraid to speak. This was happening already under Obama, and they would be put in cages. Now, whether they should be put in cages or not is a different story. I don't know. I will not comment. But it was already happening under Obama. So why blame Trump? What Trump did, fascinatingly, was improve upon the situation by saying, you do a genetic DNA test. When they claim that they are relatives, we check it. And if they are not, then actually they are arrested. They took action about it. What was happening under Obama was they would be put in cages and eventually they would be released in the US and they would be back in the trafficking line. Under Trump, they got arrested after that. And many other changes which took place. I'm not interested in going into details, but I'm just pointing out to you how the media has been lying to you. And then when it comes to this comment, you're saying, oh, because he was bad with the children or he sexually abuses women, it's not corrected by the fact that he instituted Abraham Accords. No, it's not about people. First of all, as I've said there, that's a falsehood. He was not a serial sexual offender. He did not do whatever was claimed by the media. But it's not about whether you're a good person and then once in a while you do a good thing. I showed a consistency of a pattern. And again, I said, I'm not concerned about whether he's a good person. You like him, you dislike him. It's not my concern. Look at the pattern of actions. A person doing consistently not one Abraham Accords, but 20 different actions, and all of them reasonable, rational, shows you a very different picture. So be very careful. Do not allow the media impression and the programming to affect you. You've made this comment also about MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, with whom Trump teamed up as we mentioned last time in some detail. So naturally, and I was expecting this comment to come up, and I might have spoken about it anyway today, naturally the cabal is against MBS. What do you do when you are against them? What does cabal do? You start an attack. If you can find nothing to attack them on, then you create fake stories or make what is called ad hominem attacks. As you saw even Constantine's comment about Trump, lacking empathy, he's malevolent, villain, demagogue, poisonous, malicious, ruthless, sociopath. What do you mean? Give me one evidence for that other than an impression. And the media builds impressions by giving you stories, and when the stories are proved to be wrong, they never tell you that this was proved to be wrong. You're left with an impression. And so all these words basically describe an impression, and this is what we call ad hominem attacks. You attack the man's character, but not his actions. And you create an impression it's a bad person. The same game is being played against Modi, against Putin. Why? Because they don't play along with the cabal. So it's very difficult to find something against Modi. So all you can do is claim that he's a tyrant. With Trump, at least because he was more flamboyant in certain ways, they've at least found some claims. But what do you do with somebody like Mohammed bin Salman? You have nothing against him. So the game was fascinating. So I think it was in Turkey. There is this Jamal Khashoggi, Washington Post journalist. He's not even a US citizen. He goes to Turkey to get some visa, and there is supposedly footage that shows that he goes in, does not come out. And there is supposedly an audio recording of people inside the embassy, obviously tapped by some intelligence agency, speaking about how he's going to be killed or was killed or something like that. I don't remember the details now. It was some time back. And then came out the story, promoted by the US media, that this Khashoggi was killed. His body was cut into tiny pieces and then discarded. And it was supposedly done by Mohammed bin Salman directly under his orders. Now, this was used then to attack Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, I will say, and turn people against him, but also to deny him certain kinds of access in the media. So all those who believed this story obviously ended up with a bad image of him. And I know people who would not even talk about him. Oh, I hate that man. But on what basis? The media said it was directly under order of MBS. And how do you know that? Nowhere in those recordings, nowhere in those video was anywhere a connection with MBS. So it's very easy, if the media or the cabal wanted to blame somebody, you create what is called a false flag. You create an attack by your own people and then blame somebody else for the attack by planting evidence that it was somebody else. And so there's nothing at all to connect with MBS other than the claim from the US State Department or Deep State Department, as Trump once said, claiming it with no evidence provided. So perhaps, yes, perhaps Jamal was killed, but why? And again, the reason it sounds so ridiculous when Constantine says that for writing things that MBS didn't approve of, there's far worse that's being written about MBS. Why would he bother to kill somebody? For people like that, it does not matter what is written in the media. They have a thick enough skin, they don't care. So there's no reason even for why Jamal would be killed. If he had to be killed cleanly, then it would have been done so quietly that you would not even know. He would have died in his sleep with a heart attack or something. You would not know that he has been assassinated if it was actually an order coming from a head of state of that kind. You would not have him go under TV cam in a video recording of a camera going in an embassy and not coming out. This shows a setup. It was designed to trap and blame somebody by doing it in the open. It's the most stupid thing you would do if you wanted to assassinate him. So I would say, and this is my understanding of the situation, perhaps some people did. Those people who did were cabal controlled, and it was used to blame MBS. In fact, what MBS did in response to that, he instituted an investigation. The people who actually were responsible for whatever might have happened, and we don't know the details exactly, were taken care of legally within his framework of law. Interestingly, none of those people claimed that the orders came from MBS. Even if they did, there was no way to trace, because when such a thing happens a head of state gives an order for something like that, there are always at least 3 to 4 levels in the chain of command. There's no way it can ever be traced back. So all this is merely posturing by cabal interests to blame MBS, spoil his reputation, or cause him harm. Now, the reason why I've gone into such detail on this particular matter, other than just the impression I would have ignored it if it was not a serious issue. It is a serious issue not just with MBS. There's an exact same attempt. Remember, there's a playbook that is used by the cabal. They repeat the same patterns. The exact same attempt being made against Modi today. And I'm saying this in advance so that you understand when it does amplify further up. So what happened in Canada was that one of these extremist leaders of the so-called Khalistan movement, who had already announced and was involved in assassinations in India by his gang of thugs, got in a brawl with a gang, another gang of thugs of similar type in Canada. They had a conflict and this man was killed. Now, all this is part of the known data that there was ongoing conflict between these two gangs, that this man was the source because he would openly speak of how they had eliminated their rivals in India and so on. So, technically, under Canadian law, this man should have been labeled a terrorist. And India had already declared him a terrorist. Now, between two terrorists, there's a gang war and this guy gets eliminated. And the President of Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, after having spent a week in India, goes back and announces that this was an operation by Indian intelligence agencies and directly blames Modi. When Indian government asks for evidence, nothing is provided. Now it's more than a month or two that this claim has been put up. No evidence to this date. The United States State Department comes out with a statement that this is very bad, India should not do such things, they should not assassinate people, and you should cooperate with Canada's investigation. I think it was the Biden administration which made the statement. Cooperate with what? If you have already the evidence, all you have to do is reveal it. Where is the cooperation required from the Indian government if you already had the evidence? If you didn't have the evidence, how dare you make a claim of this kind? So serious as an allegation that it disrupts the relationship between two countries. So as you know what happened, India had to pull out its embassy staff, ordered Canadian embassy staff to be reduced to equivalent levels and so on. Serious repercussions. So either Justin Trudeau was utterly incompetent in making a statement like this, or it was done deliberately to sour the relationship with India, but that's not the goal. What did they gain from that? The goal was to target Modi. And so I saw the pattern, it was clear, I was waiting for further evidence, it will take that direction, and you see now what's happened. In the United States now, the US State Department has come up with a claim that India was trying to assassinate one more Khalistani terrorist leader who had threatened to blow up a plane on 17th of November. Now, here's a man threatening to blow up a plane on Canadian or US soil, and the government is happy to keep him on, not arresting him, and is protecting him supposedly from an Indian attempt to assassinate. Now again, if that be the case, bring out the evidence, there is none. This is part of a program to eventually target Modi. They may or may not succeed in Modi, but they will target the BJP as an entity, or the current Indian government, which is Modi BJP related. So by building such impressions in the media with zero evidence, but making the repetition of the message so loud that you believe there is strong evidence, or outright lying that there is evidence but never revealing it, they create such an impression. And the result will be subsequently the image that Modi has internationally will be soiled, as they have effectively soiled the reputation of MBS for those of you who believed in the media. But as I said, when there is zero evidence, or even when the media claims evidence but does not show it, be clear that there is an attempt to malign somebody for a larger purpose, for which I will ask simply, what is the person doing right? MBS is doing good work, Modi is doing good work, obviously they will be attacked. And this is the only way they can attack, because they have nothing else of real value with which they could criticize the person. So whenever media resorts to ad hominem attacks, be sure that the person is doing good work and there is nothing else that they have against them. If they have something, they will actually directly blackmail or expose that actual fact that they have against them. So I think that's good enough for the comment on this Jamal Khashoggi and MBS. But I wanted to link it to what's being done currently with Modi. Observe this pattern, and you'll see many interesting things in the coming weeks. We can go to his last question.
His last portion. Is there any real concrete evidence of a single unified cabal? I am skeptical of this notion, but willing to be persuaded if there is anything concrete one can point to. But to me, it sounds too much like QAnon, the one grand conspiracy that connects all dots and makes perfect sense of everything.
Okay, so probably from the question, it seems Konstantin has not seen the full series. So I would suggest you watch from the beginning. Because from the very beginning, I've explained how the cabal is formed and how it has grown across centuries also. And I've consistently stated that there is no necessarily one point of coordination or control. It could be a very diverse mix of many different interests, but common in their, let's say, mindset, values, and overall goals, which are appropriation of power, control, enslavement of humanity, and then with alignment with the Asuric interests, the other things. So I've never claimed anything like this. So I don't see why you're looking for single unified cabal. My point though is, whether it is single unified or not, does it make a difference? Why lose yourself on technicalities which are irrelevant to the point? The point is humanity is being oppressed by an elite group of power structures which want to enslave humanity and prevent human evolution. And this is something Sri Aurobindo foresaw 100 years ago and described in detail as an inevitable passage, logically and from the psychology of human development, that this had to happen. So if that be the case, does it matter whether it's single unified or multiple, if it's 2, 3, 4 groups or a dozen groups? It does not matter. Why catch upon these technicalities and then raise silly questions? So to me, it's when you say it sounds too much like QAnon, the grand conspiracy, I would say, please, why are you even bringing such conspiracy angles to it? As far as I understand, QAnon is one more of the media created falsehoods. So I have put a link on today's description. There's a video there which I've actually put 10 links in all. And I would highly encourage for you to look at it. Each of these links I have put a small description at the beginning so you know what it's about. And one of the links I have put, I think in this case it is the number 6 link, which is the QAnon shaman. So the mainstream media declared that there's this grand QAnon conspiracy, and the head or the public face of the conspiracy is some guy who was dressed like a shaman who was walking in the United States Capitol. Finally, he was released as being harmless. And there's an interview with him. And he's the one who, as the face of QAnon conspiracy, declares QAnon is a conspiracy created by the media. It has no other value. So I would simply say, look at that, look at the evidence, and you don't need to get into all these kinds of fanciful distractions, which are entirely mainstream media created, invented. Rather, look at facts, look at evidence, draw your own conclusions, and if you're not sure, well, look at what others have done who have perhaps a better understanding or have done better research, and look at the evidence they provide. You may agree with some of their conclusions, you may not. Provisionally, you can agree and say, well, until I get more evidence, I will wait. But it seems likely, this being the case, it seems likely, but sometimes it's too far for you to believe. You say, all right, it is provisionally, I accept, let's wait for more. So my point is, a lot of the questions are actually coming from a complete misunderstanding of what I have been saying, or misrepresentation, mixing with a lot of junk that comes from the media propaganda. Distrust the media rather, and make your own study. I will complete this part of the discussion with a later question about media sources that you can rely on. We'll see that later. But we can go to the next question.
We receive another letter from under the nickname Gogovinda. I wonder why you do not mention the biggest terrorist, the USA, and the apartheid and terror state Israel. both dominated by Christian and Jewish Zionism, guided by the dream of the great Israel and the destruction of Al-Aqsa. For 75 years, they have been oppressing Palestinians. They treated them as animals. The West has been the aggressor for 500 years. What about all the cultures they destroyed? To mention the highest one, the American natives. 9/11 was the false flag needed to start a war on terror, a catastrophe for Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, and so on. The USA did so many coups in so many countries. They are the reason for the fights for freedom of the Muslim world. The present Trump is exactly this, a Muslim hater and a Zionist, probably because of his grandchildren. He promised to shed for every drop of American blood a gallon of Hamas blood.
Okay.
This is
So-
one part of the question. And
Yes, I'll
I
answer
will
this.
be
We go to the
reading
next. Yeah. So it is a much longer question. I had to edit it because it's the same idea repeated many times. So first of all, I'm not here to describe who's a terrorist, who's not. I'm not going to give you a list of who are all the terrorists. I'm not here to say these are good people or those are bad people. That's a very immature and childish approach to understand the world. If you, and again, it seems like you've not seen the whole series from the beginning, please do look at it. I'm describing a much bigger picture. If you understood that picture, you will see that I am not interested in whether USA is a terrorist organization or not. In fact, it will be a big mistake for you to even claim the USA is terrorist. You have to understand within every government, within every power structure, within every intelligence agencies, there are factions of interests. There are those which are aligned to the larger, what we have described as the cabal interests and asuric interests. And there are those who are genuinely well intended for the good of the nation, for the good of the country, for the good of humanity even perhaps. And there's always a tension between these. And these human instruments are often vessels for other forces, which hook into them because of their allegiance either of a higher aspiration or of a personal ambition. Depending on which side you are aligned on within your consciousness, you tend to be pulled one way or the other. And eventually, as you go up the chain of power, there are entrenched systems which either promote you because you're aligned to them or demote you because you're not aligned to them. And that's how these cabal structures form, inevitably. We are at a point in the human evolution where this cabal structure had become strong enough that it was suffocating human evolution. And that's why this understanding is so important. So, yes, you're right that you can say Europe has been an aggressor through various kinds of colonizations. But to say that they are the only aggressor would be a huge mistake. Because the Middle East was full of aggressions. India, the whole of Middle East was wiped out by a very militant Islam. What about Persia? It was never Islamic. Afghanistan was never Islamic. Syria and many of these countries, they were never Islamic. It was Islam which destroyed. So by your logic, you will say Islam has been a serial aggressor for 800 years. And in India, so much was destroyed, all the thousands of temples, millions of people. If I remember right, it was Wilson, one of these historians, who claims that over a span of 300 years, in India there were some 300 million people butchered by religious bigotry of Islam. And how many? In uncountable temples. We are not here to compare who is more worse. That was the state of human evolution in which you had many of these semi-barbaric, under the guise of religious interests, which did a lot of damage across the world. And yes, Europe was also part of that game. It doesn't mean that you will label all of Europe today for those crimes. The same thing was happening in Africa. In the slave trade, there were African tribes which were seizing other tribes and selling them to other African tribes and then to Europeans. It was a trade market of slaves. And they were all part of it. So you are programmed by a narrative today which wants to paint one group against another, making one a victim and another an oppressor, which is completely false. At that stage, in Africa, there were oppressors and victims across the board, across tribes, and it had nothing to do with the color of the skin. It was the culture of the period. You see the same in the Middle East. Under religious authority, religious law of Islam, you are allowed to enslave anybody who you caught in battle. You have to go to the hadiths and read. So if you say that because that happened 500 years ago, you're going to blame the people today as if they have not evolved, then that's a very immature approach. So I will not play this game, and it would be wrong for you to take that position. And even I'm a little surprised for you to even claim that Europe destroyed the highest culture of the American natives. No, it was not the highest culture. It had very little in terms of civilizational heights. It had practically no higher forms of art or sculpture or music. It was again a very, let's say, pacifist, living with nature, very close to nature, open to shamanic values with occult knowledge. It was a culture. But to say it was the highest is a complete misunderstanding of what is meant by culture or civilization. You want to find a high culture, you'll find in Persia, which was destroyed by Islam. So are you going to blame Islam for that? I think the same Govinda has also made the comment somewhere, are you a Muslim hater? I think that whole mindset and approach to understanding things is so immature. Normally I would have simply ignored it. But the questions you have raised and the form in which it is accusatory requires me to make this clarification. And because it is part of the comment section, I don't want to delete comments because then it becomes a game of one-upmanship. It's not interesting for me. I'm trying to present a very different approach to understanding the world from an evolutionary perspective. And it does not matter whether you are a believer in Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or no believer. What matters is the level of consciousness and the refinement of values by which you live, and whether those are assisting your growth, your community's growth, and humanity's growth. If it is done under the cover of a religious title, no problem. If you're a terrorist who's actually harming, whether under a religious cover or not, again, it's irrelevant, you're harming. That's all that matters. So you have to move out of this kind of thinking. And then it is just such an immature claim to even say that US is the reason why the Muslim world is fighting for freedom. Before the US stepped in, you had so many free Muslim countries. It had nothing to do with Muslim. It had to do with the mindset. Look at Afghanistan today. It is still not a nation. It is still a collection of tribes. You can blame others for whatever issues they may have or for being exploited. But the content of the people and their values is still tribal. If you cannot understand this, you will not understand why they keep getting overwhelmed by other groups and other interests. Because they're always fighting among each other. And because they're fighting among each other, they are open to being misused or manipulated by others. This is what happened when the British stepped into India. They used various kingdoms and their conflicts between each other to play one against the other and then took over the country. So you can say, yes, the British, they were oppressors, or they took advantage of a situation. And to say, to blame them for India being colonized is kind of silly, because if it was not them, it would be somebody else. And if it was not somebody else, it could be within India, one group colonizing the rest. Things could have taken any of these directions when people were ready to be colonized because of internal conflicts and divisions. You have to understand the underlying psychological causes. Then the specifics don't matter too much. You've also made the same mistake as earlier person. Trump is exactly a Muslim hater, Zionist, probably because of grandchildren. You're allowing your fantasy to fill in, or the media programming to fill in a belief, probably because of grandchildren. It has zero value to get into these beliefs. If he is a Muslim hater, if he is a hater of anything, he could not have done what he was doing. Again, I say, go straight to listen to him. Look at his actions. Actually, in his speeches, in his interactions with people, you don't find a man who is hating. When he has had to, for example, prevent refugees coming from specific countries, 6 countries that he targeted, the media pushed it as Muslim hating. No, it was not. These were 6 countries from which trained terrorists were coming into the United States based on State Department investigations going back a couple of decades. They knew it. No president did anything about it. Some of them actively allowed those people to come in as an influx. Trump said, if we know that they're sending terrorists, we put restrictions there. That was all. If it was Muslim hating, it would be against all Muslim countries. It was not. It was specific to those 6. And the data for that was from before he was president. So you have to go into the facts. You have to go into in depth on the issues. Do not trust the media. Do not read headlines and stop with an impression. And I would even go so far as to say, when you find something like this, a statement of this kind in the media, and you don't find further data, look at the opposite side. Go to those media outlets which promote and praise Trump and look at what they have to say about this. If you read something very positive about Trump and he's saying he's so wonderful, look at the other side and look at what those who hate him have to say. And that's the only way you'll get a clear picture or a full picture. Because he does make mistakes. I'm not saying he's perfect. He may attempt something which may not work. There may be a failure and so on. But don't get stuck with these very superficial viewpoints and your claim that he promised to shed gallons of Hamas blood. No, nothing like that. You will not find in any of Trump's statements this kind of immaturity and emotional knee-jerk reactions. They're all very carefully thought out and stated. You go back to his tweets, going back 10 years. He had stated in 2012, he's spoken of child trafficking and what was needed to stop it. When he became president, he did it. Look at the videos of his interviews in the 1980s and 90s. That's why I've put some of these links. What he's speaking then and what he spoke when he became president are exactly the same. He has not changed. He has put into effect what he spoke then and the vision that he had for the United States development. So be careful. Do not allow the media to play you. Distrust the media. We go to the next question.
The second part, he made another comment. I do not go with the mother who thought that the state of Israel would be the sign of the coming golden age. The Jewish prophecy is not like this.
Yes, okay. So again, to Govinda, I'll say you have not read the mother directly. She has never made any such statement that state of Israel would be sign of coming golden age. I don't know where you get these false ideas. Be very careful. Do not allow yourself to be filled with junk like this. And then especially do not make comments in public of such kind, because this is completely false. The mother was very clear with regard to Israel. There were a couple of statements that she made. One of them, which is very simple, I'm just quoting from memory. Maybe the next time when we speak of the war in Israel, I will get you the exact quote, where she says something like this: the nation of Israel has as much right to exist as any other nation. Very simple. And then she makes certain comments about the nature of the Jewish people and the Jewish mind and the Palestinian people and the Palestinian mind. And she makes a comparison about that, and that is very interesting to see, and we will look at that next time when we go into the details in depth about the situation currently happening in that region. But don't let yourself be swayed by these kinds of impressions. And I would even say, when you have an impression like this, question your sources. And if once the source has been caught lying, distrust them forever. These are the same people, and I'll say this also for Konstantin's comments. These are the same people who told you in 2001 that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. These are the same people who told you that Kavanaugh was a rapist, or etc. These are the same people who justified lockdowns and demanded that you wear masks when scientifically it was more harmful for you to wear masks than to not wear masks. These are the same people who told you to stay indoors when being exposed to the sun was your cure from getting infections. So, if these people have lied to you consistently for decades, do not trust them on matters which are so crucial. And one more comment, because I had to edit this. These comments were very long. There's somewhere Govinda also makes a comment. Mahatma Gandhi said that Palestinian people have a right, whatever. I'm sorry, if you followed Mahatma Gandhi's statements, then by his advice, England should have submitted itself to Hitler and allowed Hitler to invade England. And I'm quoting Mahatma when he says, allow him to rape your women and kill your children. This is the advice Gandhiji gave. I don't know why we call him Mahatma, somebody named him. This is the advice Gandhiji gave to the British people, that you submit yourself to Hitler and allow yourself to be killed. This is the advice he gave to the Indian people when there were riots attacking Hindus. He said, let yourself be killed because the one who is killing you is your Muslim brother. And the riots were not about Muslims hating Hindus. The riots were because the Muslims had been denied the right to have the Caliph of Turkey as their religious head by the British. So rather than attacking the British, they started killing the Hindus because that was a soft target. And Gandhi told the Hindus, allow yourself to be killed. And then if he tells the Jewish people that you have no right to have a state of your own, I would still put that as a very serious question and not blindly follow just because it is some famous person who makes a statement. So I think we have to be very careful not to allow the media to sway ourselves. This is the reason why I have named this discussion today false narratives, because the media is very skillful in building these false narratives. And we'll look at a few more things as we go along. We can go to the next question.
Under the nickname Silver Phantom, I find you that you're deviating from the path of integral yoga when you start expounding on contemporary politics and the machinations going on in the world of international business and commerce. Some of your assumptions seem largely based on half knowledge or on sources of doubtful veracity. Sri Aurobindo's predictions and prophecies were based on his connectedness to a vast cosmic intelligence. But your disquisitions seems manifestly biased and, frankly, turning a blind eye to the overt ethical transgressions made by the egoistical individuals and their crass policies. Please stop these videos on contemporary events and people and return to Aurobindo philosophy and practices.
Yes. So again with Silver Phantom, his point is that there's people whom I have appreciated, let's say. And I have told you already, these are trigger names. Be very careful. Do not let yourself get triggered. His problem is that I am supposedly turning a blind eye to their overt ethical transgressions because they're egoistic individuals with crass policies. I don't think I have any interest in their ethical transgressions or not. And the policies I've spoken of were factual, economic. They were not crass at all. They were extremely practical with amazing results. And so when you say crass policies, on the basis of what? Egoistical individuals, I'm not concerned if they're egoistical or not. I'm not here to judge them spiritually in their spiritual evolution. I was observing their actions, which are making way possible for a wider human awakening and freedom from the cabal suppression. That is all. If they're egoistical, it's not my concern. If the egoism is good and helpful to evolution, why not? I think a lot of Silver Phantom's thinking comes from a very shallow ascetic spirituality. So spirituality, or you're judging a person based on them being not egoistical or pretending to be not egoistical, I think you'll have a hard time showing me anybody in politics who does not have an ego. And if they do not seem to be egoistical because they assert themselves, and how would you know if it is egoistical or not, unless you have a deeper spiritual perception? Politics is a play of power. The moment there is power, there has to be assertion of power. With assertion of power, you can easily misread it as egoistical imposition. Can you see the difference? Whether it comes from a different value, perhaps even a selfless assertion of power. If you can't, then you have no I think it's not a question of whether they're egoistical or not. I would even say let them be as egoistical as they can if the ego serves a higher purpose. If the same egoistic person is saying, Divine Mother, I will do what you demand of me, and executes it, wonderful. In the ashram, we had several people that the mother actually said in so many words. They were emanations of asuric beings with very strong vital egos, many of them very egoistical, and she found in them the instruments that she needed to build the institutional framework of the ashram. So if Silver Phantom applies that mentality, oh, these were egoistical people, don't praise them. I'm sorry, I will praise them for the good that they did under the mother's instructions. I will praise them for their loyalty to the mother. Some of them, not all. Some of them also went against the mother. But still, I'll praise them for the little that they did in following her instructions. So to me, that's never a reference whether they are egoistical or not. And ethical transgressions. What ethics? Your ethics are based on some textbook which is changing every few centuries. That's never a reference. What is the reference is whether it assists the growth of consciousness of the collective and the individual. And these are all artificial and fake paradigms. And still, after all this so-called ethical transgression, they'll say, is it even true? Or has the media been lying to you? Don't believe them. Sri Aurobindo never made predictions. He never made prophecies. And if he made observations, he always gave the rationale for why and how. So I think you have not really understood also Sri Aurobindo's approach. But none of this matters. I'm coming to your main question. When he says stop this, return to philosophy and practices. For me personally, a philosophy which does not have any applicable value in real life and for solving problems of life is insufficient. A philosophy which does not help you to navigate the crisis of life is worthless. A spiritual practice which does not give you a deeper insight in circumstances around you, or does not give you knowledge or strength or skill to change those circumstances and turn them forward for an evolutionary development, is weak or worthless even. So, yes, one could stay stuck with the philosophy and the practice only and separate it completely from the crisis of life, which would be the way of the ascetic paths, and many do follow that. And if that is your way, that's fine. But this is certainly not the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo faced all these situations head on and actively intervened, not just occultly, but even materially, in Indian polity, in global events. And just because a lot of his work was done through occult and spiritual interventions does not make them any less, rather they are more effective than material interventions. And if he did not have that capacity for an occult or spiritual intervention, he would have intervened materially only, as he did in the beginning of his struggle to bring India free of colonial rule. He organized what at that point, or I think even in history, can be called the world's largest revolution. In sheer numbers and space that it covers, it's the biggest of any other space in the world. And he did this single-handedly. And none of his philosophy, none of the practices are disconnected from this. Today we are only talking about, in order to understand the complexities of what otherwise would be such a huge confusion. The biggest problem we have today when we look at the world is this massive confusion. And if only the spiritual practice and the philosophy could give us an insight to cut through this confusion and seize what are the, let's say, essential elements, forces, actions, directions, processes, players. If we could have that, that would be worthwhile. And what we are discussing in this series on current events is precisely to apply the knowledge that Sri Aurobindo gives us on a very practical level to be able to understand this. So almost everything I've said, I have tried to give the rationale of it, and where I have looked at evidence of circumstances, events or individuals, I've stayed as far as possible with what is verifiable objectively and data which is already available. And occasionally where I have my conclusions, observations, or opinions, I have marked them as my opinion. And I say this is my opinion, maybe there is more, I don't know. As I've said, I see a certain trend, a certain direction, as they're trying to trap a Modi or the Modi government with these labels similar to what they did successfully in the public eye with MBS. I see this trend and I'm saying it ahead. I was expecting a second accusation, it has come. So far, but I'm saying this is my opinion, and that's it. But what Modi has done in terms of actions for India, or what Trump has done for the United States or the world, these are objective. So I don't see why you can claim sources of doubtful veracity. These are all available. These are well-known things. So I would, your idea that this is deviation from the path of integral yoga is, I think, also a mistake, because the integral yoga is not shorn from life. It is very much intended to master life and circumstances. So I will go back to a certain text of Sri Aurobindo and to highlight this distinction, because this is a very important distinction between the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and in contrast to ascetic spiritual paths. So this was asked by Sahana. Many of you have heard this because I have used it other times. Sahana asks Sri Aurobindo what to do if somebody criticizes him or spreads false stories about him, about Sri Aurobindo, whether she should keep quiet or reply and fight for him. So Sri Aurobindo writes, no doubt hatred and cursing are not the proper attitude. It is true also that to look upon all things and all people with a calm and clear vision, to be uninvolved and impartial in one's judgment, is a quite proper yogic attitude. A condition of perfect samatha or equality can be established in which one sees all as equal, friends and enemies included, and is not disturbed by what men do or by what happens. Now here's an important point. To be equal and not be disturbed does not mean you don't care. You understand this is a friend, you understand this is an enemy, you understand somebody is doing work for or against evolution, but you're not disturbed, but you're ready to act. This is important. The question is whether this is all that is demanded from us, he says. If so, then the general attitude would be one of neutral indifference to everything. But the Bhagavad Gita, which strongly insists on a perfect and absolute equality, goes on to say, fight, destroy the adversary, conquer. If there is no kind of general action wanted, no loyalty to truth as against falsehood, except for one's personal sadhana, no will for the truth to conquer, then the equality of indifference will suffice. So really you have to ask yourself this question. Do you want loyalty to truth against falsehood, or you will say, I don't care? Do you want the truth to conquer, or you say, I don't care? That's your choice. But you can't say that for somebody else to make a different choice would be wrong. So, but here, Sri Aurobindo says, but here, that is here in the ashram, in the integral yoga, and for all of us who want to practice the integral yoga, but here there is a work to be done, a truth to be established, against which immense forces are arranged. Invisible forces which use visible things and persons and actions for their instruments. So here we have this picture of what we have been describing as, now on the global scale, the cabal and instruments. Whether you see it on a small scale or a big scale, it's the same thing. If one is among the disciples, the seekers of this truth, and this truth is very important, this truth is not an otherworldly truth. This truth is for manifestation of the divine in life, for transforming life, for the rule of the divine in material circumstances, in nature. And it's different from other truths or other systems of yoga or spirituality for whom the world is an illusion and they want to get out, or whatever else. So this truth is very important. But here there is a work to be done. So if one is among the disciples, the seekers of this truth, one has to take sides for the truth, to stand against the forces that attack it and seek to stifle it. Arjuna wanted not to stand for either side, to refuse any action of hostility even against assailants. So this is probably what our friend thinks would be the right attitude of a spiritual person. So Sri Krishna, who insisted so much on equality, strongly rebuked his attitude and insisted equally on his fighting the adversary. Have samata, he said, equality. And seeing clearly the truth, fight. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo says, therefore to take sides with the truth and to refuse to concede anything to the falsehood that attacks, to be unflinchingly loyal and against the hostiles and the attackers, is not inconsistent with equality. It is personal and egoistic feeling that has to be thrown away. Hatred and vital ill will have to be rejected. But loyalty and refusal to compromise with the assailants and the hostiles, or to dally with their ideas and demands and say, after all, we can compromise with what they ask from us, or to accept them as companions and our own people, these things have a great importance. And this is going to be very important when we discuss the situation in Israel or in Ukraine. And you'll see it's not always obvious what is right, what is wrong. It's not always obvious which side. And all sides tend to have their mixed elements. So, again, coming to a very practical aspect of this, he says, if the attack were a physical menace to the work and the leaders and doers of the work, one would see this at once. But because the attack is of a subtler kind, can a passive attitude be right? And then he gives you the full picture. It is a spiritual battle, inward and outward. By neutrality and compromise or even passivity, one may allow the enemy forces to pass and crush down the truth and its children. If you look at it from this point, you will see that if the inner spiritual equality is right, the active loyalty and firm taking of sides is as right, and the two cannot be incompatible. So this is very important. By neutrality and compromise or even passivity, one may allow the enemy forces to pass and crush down the truth and its children. So neutrality in the face of opposition between truth and falsehood is a mistake. Compromise with falsehood is a mistake. Passivity when truth is being attacked by falsehood is a mistake. At least for those who follow this ideal of the integral yoga. So I'm putting this in the context of this observation of a friend to hopefully better convey why I chose to take this topic and this discussion. I could have ignored it, but in the face of what is currently happening and the huge chaos and confusion that has been spread by the media and through the media, intended to deceive us and lead us off track in our religions by giving a false idea of what is true and what is false, what is for evolution and what is against, we could easily be deceived. And it's a choice that we make within the circle of our immediate influence, whether we take sides and state what is true. You do not need to impose it on others. You can state it as what you observe, what you think is right. Where you're asked, you can state it. Where you're not asked, you may choose to not state it. So it's a choice I have made. I've also chosen to withhold, not give a full picture of many more things which perhaps I may have a sense of, but withhold, limited to what I think is a bare minimum, occasionally going a little more than a minimum, but still where I feel that it is worthwhile or where I feel there is an interest to go deeper. And I know that this will open me to attacks. It's a balance one has to keep very carefully. But I do feel that if I did not say these things and if I did not share what I see as a very clear perspective, then I would feel that I have not fulfilled my responsibility, at least among those who would trust what I'm sharing or the poise and position from which I'm sharing these things. So I'm taking a personal responsibility and a personal risk consciously. And after that, it's up to you. If you find it useful, make use of it. If you don't, you can ignore it, and then it's up to you what you do with your life and what allegiance you make with the truth and the falsehood and the battle that is ongoing. But for those of us who feel it necessary, absolutely, you must understand more deeply, seize upon the situation with a clarity that cuts through the clutter and the junk and the deceptions, so that you can catch what is real and remove what is false and stand by for what is best for humanity. I think we will close with one more question from Mani.
Thank you for the last week's session,
The name?
the
Yes.
peacemaker.
Yes.
Mani, he's addressing this letter. Thank you for last week's session, the peacemakers. Your explanation on ISIS being an ideological movement controlled by the Cabal rather than a religious movement was very apt. Perhaps there's a similarity here with Zionism, which is also an ideology distinct from Judaism. From your talks, I can see clear that within any government, country, or religion, there can be factions, groups, or individuals under the sway of the Cabal, but also those standing for evolution.
Yes, it's an important observation, and so I wanted to build upon this. You're right that there is a distinction of ideology as well as religious content, and even the distinction you make between Zionism and Judaism. Yes, perhaps, but I will say within Zionism there are factions, within Judaism there are factions, and sometimes not 2 or 3, there could be even more. So inevitably, and this is the nature of life and the nature of any ideology or mental formation or religious belief, that there would always be aspects and angles which will tend to create divisions, and for each person sometimes the way they receive or align to a certain belief system or ideology or even religious practice would be different, and therefore inevitably there are multiple fragments. Again, for me, the point is not that. Understand their complexities, understand their multiplicities. I'm not even interested in going into the details of those, because after all, they're belief systems. What I'm interested in, which one aligns itself to a higher evolutionary thrust, irrespective of the framework out of which they emerge. So it would be even a mistake to say within Zionism there is only this or that. I will say within Zionism there will be elements which go in this direction and elements which go in that, and it would be a very different thing. I remember how it was. I was in one of the Middle Eastern countries, without naming it, for a interfaith meeting, and in the evening we had a formal dinner where some members from the United States Navy were present, because it was a ship which had berthed in that country. And one of them was sharing his experiences. He was by practice a Mormon, so that's a kind of Christianity, one of the forms. And then he says, I'm a Zionist. And next to him was this girl who had been brought up in that Middle Eastern country with this anti-Zionism thinking. And she said to him, for a long time, I thought all Zionists were bad. And I understood that there are actually differences, and there is a difference of approach. And only recently I've come to this understanding that no, there are some of them are good people, and even their beliefs are good, and they're not against us meaning Muslims. And so they had a very interesting conversation. I was not interested too much to go into what were the differences and all. But just to give you an example of how it works. And the man was such a fine man. And he came from a completely different religious tradition, and it was a blend of so many different things. And I'm putting it together here. Christianity, Islam, and Zionism, all three were perfectly in harmony, depending on the framework within which you see those, let's say, ideals or beliefs or objectives. So again, to me, it's not so much what is the official definition of Zionism. It's rather what's the framework in which the person sees it and practices it, and it can be in a perfect harmony with all other beliefs, religions, traditions without needing to conflict. Or it could take a turn which is conflicting, but because of the person's particular, let's say, boundaries. And I hope this will be like a precursor for our discussion next time, which we will look at the conflict ongoing in Israel as well as in Ukraine. But I think this is a good point to end on. I wanted to take a quick look at the observations or comments in the chat. But so Kush makes this observation that for a long time I was ignoring politics. Now I can't ignore it because it affects the human life on a large scale. Yes, in fact, this is the only reason why one, as a spiritual practitioner, would want to study or keep track of political events. Even Sri Aurobindo used to listen to the radio and look at the newspaper from this perspective to keep track of events, but to see where things were going and get external validation for certain trends which he was already perceiving in other ways. But this should be our approach. It's not about who is a bad person or a good person, what did they say, what they didn't say. Mostly what comes as news or statements is fake and posturing. Don't even waste time on it. Look rather for trends and look at the big picture. And within that, the trivialities don't matter, don't lose time over it. There is a question which I will have to take up next time because today we've already run out of time, where somebody asks what would be reliable sources for information, and I'm going to take that up next time, and also how you can process this information. The way I do it, for example, and I'll elaborate on this next time, I look at headlines, about 100 headlines in a day. I don't waste time at all. I scroll through, get an overall sense. I'll tell you what methods I use also to get that. And then when I find a certain headline is interesting or a new trend or some variation or diversion in the trend, I look at all the headlines relating to that topic. So for example, currently when this thing started with the Hamas attack on Israel, obviously one had to go into detail to understand what were the primary drives and motives and responses, but then who were other actors, who was responding how. So I will scroll through amplifying this about 30-40 headlines. And there's Iran's response, there is the Hezbollah response, there is the Lebanon response, and then a couple of others. But just scanning through headlines. And then occasionally something which will say, yes, here there's something more. I go in, zoom in, get the necessary information, and that's it. Where needed, you can read more. But this gives a broad sense of direction. And then you observe. Once you have a bigger picture, once you have this larger framework, you don't need to go too much into detail. See where it's going, in what direction it's heading. Look for the patterns. And especially, as I said, do not trust the media's claims. And especially when they attack somebody, be very careful. Especially if you see an attack of multiple sources at the same time, multiple headlines for the same messaging, be very careful. And you'll see these patterns very quickly. Once you've understood this, I'm happy that we have many other messages and emails which I have not kept here as questions, but I see this pattern many people are beginning to observe. And once you begin to observe, you'll find you'll never again get easily swayed. You cannot unsee. Once you see this game, you cannot unsee it. So I think that's it for today. I want next time to take up a few more related events which will complete this part of the discussion which we did with the those who have been disruptors, and then take up the discussion on the war. And you will see it will all lead into one continuum, into the war itself. But I hope with this clarification, many of the questions and doubts which have come up in this way have been resolved. For those who are coming in later, please do watch from the beginning. This is the 9th in the series, so please look at the first few, especially because they lay a foundation of what this approach is about. We're not here to make a political analysis to see who's good or who's bad. We have to look at the trends of events, understand the forces behind, and then align ourselves to the force of light and evolution everywhere. beginning with ourselves and then in our collective space. What I have tried to show is, despite what seemed to be an oppressive darkness, there are centers of light, there is a pushback, there is a huge opportunity and hope for a large breakthrough to take place presently and in the coming 1 year particularly. If we align ourselves to this in aspiration and in our efforts, then we can assist this breakthrough to take place more completely. And that would be one way in which we can contribute even to the circumstances, even if we cannot engage directly in the politics or in the battle in its material form as it is taking place. In our consciousness and especially in our spiritual allegiance, we can make a huge difference. After all, those people who are on the battleground, who are dying to protect a higher truth, are dying it because they have love for you. And your love for them and your support to them psychologically and spiritually makes a difference. In this, you will see a huge difference between on the border, let's say, of India and Pakistan, and then we will see later other places. On the Indian side, when the soldier stands on the border, is ready to be shot and to shoot if needed, ready to die for what? For those whom he loves, immediately his family, but then much more than that, his country. And what is it you love in your country? What is it you're willing to die for to protect your country? Is it just a gigantic ego, or is it the values of the civilization that have shaped you, and the value that you see in that you're willing to die for, to protect that? This is the nature of the sacrifice that the soldier on the border of India is willing to make. You go to the other side, let's say it is in Pakistan. What is the ideology? What are they protecting? What culture of Pakistan? What greatness of something attained by this breakup of this unit? Nothing. The programming of the soldier there is hate and fear for India. They are non-believers. They are dangerous. They will kill you. They will attack. They will blow you up. Whatever it is in the programming. Hatred and fear. What are you protecting? Nothing of value. So on one side, you're ready to die because you love something greater than yourself. On the other side, you don't have something to stand for really other than hatred. If that hatred can be momentarily dissolved, the person will say, why am I here? Why am I ready to die? For what? And he would walk away from the battleground. When we have in ourselves this understanding, we can align and invoke the protection and the strength for those out there who are battling to protect human evolution and the light and the freedom of humanity from this one world government and the strangulation that the deep state is attempting to bring humanity under. Sri Aurobindo spoke of it and warned of it 100 years ago, described in detail all the struggles we are going through now, and it was given to us for a reason. He did not just write about it. He could have said, oh, it will happen anyway, why bother to write? He wrote so that we could have clarity of insight and be able to engage with the circumstances. And while we will not, most of us at least, will not be on the battleground on the forefront, for those who are there, we can pray for them and align ourselves for what they are ready to sacrifice. And that's for us, for the chance that we may be able to grow in consciousness and do what is necessary for the human evolution. That's the responsibility we have. So you see Sri Aurobindo's letter where he says, it is a spiritual battle inward and outward. By neutrality and compromise or even passivity, one may allow enemy forces to pass and crush down the truth and its children. So, inner spiritual equality is right, but active loyalty and firm taking of sides is also not just right, but necessary. And if nothing else, if you don't understand what's happening, simply say, Divine Mother, Divine Will, what you choose. I don't understand. Show me the clarity. Show me with light, with clarity what is right, or whatever you will, and make that invocation at least. And we can do this together. Namaste.